Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining the Variable Play Network. My name is Javi. It is September 26th. It is a Sunday night, and that can only mean one thing. It is time for Sunday Night Magic. So, good evening. Welcome to the show. Tonight is going to be an interesting night. I'm anticipating that this may be one of the longest episodes that we might be doing, but I'm very excited about today's topic. I've been preparing for this for several weeks now and compiling a list of recommendations that seems to be getting longer and longer while waiting for this episode to happen. We're going to jump into it, but before that, just a couple of sponsors right over here. I would like to just mention Cardcore. This would be my group on Facebook. If you are looking for Magic singles locally, please look for Cardcore and message us so that we can add you to the group chat where we post cards for sale every Monday to Thursday at beginning 7 p.m. Okay, and then the next sponsor, which is immediately below, is the Guild of Mages. If you are looking to liquidate your Magic collection and would like to get store credit from cardkingdom.com, or if you're looking to order cards that are not available in the country and are considering purchasing from cardkingdom.com, the Guild of Mages can help you out. Look them up on Facebook and let them know I sent you, and they'll help you out for sure. All right, so with that out of the way, today's topic is going to be strictly related to the new set that was released for Magic the Gathering, which is entitled Innistrad Midnight Hunt. What we're going to be talking about today are my recommendations for the format of Commander. So, or EDH or Elder Highlander, or for the Elder Dragon Highlander, for those of you who are not really familiar with the term. But basically, Commander is already one of the most mainstream or popular formats for playing Magic the Gathering at this time. I've been playing Commander for years, and this has really been my format of choice. So, with every new set, there's always a bunch of cards that can be sort of taken from the set and definitely utilized in existing commander builds, or even some totally brand new decks can be built out of them. So tonight I'm going to be giving recommendations from Innistrad Midnight Hunt. This is quite a long list, to be honest. So what I'm going to be doing is that I'm actually going to be skipping references to cards from other sets. I may mention them as like how these cards might interact with other cards, but I've taken out all of those images because we're a little over 40 recommendations from a set that is about maybe 300 cards. So this is going to be quite a long list. I might breeze through several cards, but we are really going from the common level all the way to the mythic rare. That there are so many cards that do have potential to make it into the commander format, and these are my recommendations. If you feel that I have missed a card, feel free to comment and I'll do my best to, take the feedback in and include that in the show tonight. So I'll check comments from time to time as we're going through different cards. So let's go ahead and get started. Where like to begin is, I would say, not necessarily the weakest, but the least or the most underappreciated color in all of Magic. And we're going to start with the white cards. So, the very first recommendation that I think people should consider adding into their commander builds, if you are playing white or have strategy similar to it, I present to you the Ambitious Farmhand, which can potentially become the Seasoned Cathar. Now, I don't necessarily think that the Seasoned Cathar is really worth the time, but definitely what I want to discuss here is that the Ambitious Farmhand is a 2 to cast. That is one colorless and one white, and you get a 1/1 human peasant, which is okay. But when they come in, when the Ambitious Farmhand enters the battlefield, you may search your library for a basic plains card, reveal it, put it into your hand. So this is essentially an automatic fetch. You get to go look for a basic plains, which is, I mean, you'd prefer maybe any other land, but and it goes straight to your hand, not the top of your library or anything like that. So this is actually a very efficient two drop, I would say, in the color of white. Later on in the game, if you do meet the requirements for Coven, you can switch this over into a 3/3 life link, which might be able to help you out in the late game. But I really think that this can find a spot in a lot of commander builds that just want to put down a 2 drop and go get a land so that you don't miss your next land drops. So it's an uncommon. I'm pretty sure that this is going to be a very affordable card, but definitely something to consider. So first recommendation from white would be the ambitious farmhand. I'm going to try to maybe limit this to about 5 recommendations per color, but there are some that will have to break the rule because surprisingly enough, in this set, blue has the most recommendations from me. I mean, I am primarily a blue player, so don't hold that against me. But instead, the irony here is that this was supposed to be a werewolf themed set, and barely any of them made it into cards that should or need to be played in Commander. So, I'll leave that judgment to you. But so let's move to the next recommendation that I have in mind here. So, the next white card that I think people should be running coming out of this set would be Cathar Commando. Okay, looking at this, it may not necessarily seem like the most efficient card. This is a common that we're looking at, but keep in mind it is a 2 to cast. That is 1 colorless, 1 white. Okay, and you get a 3/1 human soldier. Human tribal is a thing now. Soldier tribal has already been, I would say, a meta or a deck type, but not in Commander. I have not really seen a soldier deck in Commander. But human, there's so many human tribal decks that this actually fits right in there. What makes this card really good is that it has flash, which means that you can bring it down at instant speed. This gives you a instant blocker of 3/1 if you're trying to take away a threat. Or better yet, if you have 1 more mana to spare, you can technically sacrifice the commando and destroy target artifact or enchantment. This makes it actually a really good answer to a lot of combos and synergies that your opponents might try to use. There's a lot of ways to prevent you from playing spells or countering non-creature spells, but Cathar Commando is a creature and has flash, so you can play it out of turn and you can essentially destroy an artifact or an enchantment like an Underworld Breach perhaps, or a Food Chain, or any other combo that they might have counter protection, but there is no way that they can anticipate a creature coming in to destroy their combo. Now, there is an existing creature like this that is called the Caustic Caterpillar. It costs 1 green and then it costs 2 to do the effect, but it doesn't have flash. So this is definitely, I would say, just a cut better, cut above the Caustic Caterpillar. And also the fact that it is in white really encourages players to run white, which I highly recommend. I mean, I run Timna the Weaver, so I always try to incorporate white in all of my builds, and I would highly recommend people check this card out. I'm definitely getting one in foil. I mean, it's just a common. There's really nothing to be lost here, and it is a really good card, and I see it entering commander deck builds almost instantly now that it's been released. The paper form of these cards, I think, is a little delayed in the Philippines, but in other places, for those who are watching in other countries, if you have access to these cards, get a Cathar Commando. All right, hey, we have a comment. Okay. All right. Oh, yes, this is going back to the previous card. Hi, Nico, good evening. Yep, so just to take a step back to that card that I mentioned here, the Ambitious Farmhand is actually an uncommon card. So for a 2 to cast 1/1 that you get a land, you can kind of consider this to be like a Sakura Tribe Elder, which is a previous or an older green card, but you don't actually have to lose the creature at all. You keep the 1/1 until at some time later in the game, you might be able to flip them to a 3/3 lifelink. You never know. But pretty much as it stands on its own, I think that it will see a lot of use in decks that may not necessarily run every fetch land or are maybe leaning towards 1 or 2 colors that they still have a lot of basic lands. This is a good addition. So we already covered the next card after that, which was the Cathar Commando. This one I think is a standout from the commons, really. And we're going to be moving to the next one. Hey, hi Ron, good evening. Thank you for joining. I hope you find some cards that you might want to consider adding into your commander deck. Now that, we should start modifying those precons, man. All right, so my next recommendation for white is actually a very interesting card as well. This is the Bereaved Survivor. Now, the Bereaved Survivor itself is not necessarily the greatest creature that you can have in play. This is a 3 to cast 2/1 human peasant. Okay, that has no benefit. It costs 3, it's 2/1. It seems kind of sad. I wouldn't run it as it is, but the fact that it does flip over when it dies, whenever another creature you control dies. So if something else that you own dies, you flip this over, and now you have the Dauntless Avenger. The Dauntless Avenger is definitely the side that you want to be playing because when it attacks, you can return target creature with mana value 2 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped and attacking. Basically, for an attack trigger, you can bring back any dead creature that you have. So, taking a step back from the commando earlier, if you've sacrificed this to destroy an artifact or enchantment, you could easily just bring it back into the game. I mean, sacrificing it will flip the Bereaved Survivor. And then when you attack with the Dauntless Avenger, you can keep bringing the commando back. Essentially, you can run a very low casting cost as long as you keep the mana value of the creatures to about 2 or less. So this is effectively another card that already exists from Ikoria known as Lurus. So Lurus allowed you to bring in, I believe, a permanent spell, but he was black and white and was also lifelink. But pretty much taking black out of the mix here, you have a mono white creature that could potentially bring back so many creatures that you may have sacrificed or lost at the start of the game to bring them back for additional use. So this I am definitely getting a copy of. And the fact that it does have a transform and flip side, I believe that this will also have an alternate art. I believe that they did put in those art styles for the collector's edition. Now, I haven't seen the artwork, but I'll definitely give that or take that into consideration. So that this is my next recommendation, or the number 3 for the color of white. This is Brave Survivor and Dauntless Avenger. Hey, couple of comments. Yes, Aaron, we finally got him to play Commander. So he recently joined us to purchase the Adventures in the Forgotten Realm pre-constructed Commander decks. So he is running the red-green Dragon deck. So yes, Ron is slowly. We are bringing him in. One of us. All right. For the Commander precons, we'll touch a little bit of that. So there are only 2 precon decks. There is a green-white that runs on the Coven mechanic, and there is a black-blue that runs on zombies and the Decayed mechanic. So definitely, I mean, yes, I know that you prefer the precons because you're treating it like a contained game. But still, getting some singles sometimes might help. Just change things up once in a while. All right, so let's see another comment. Oh yeah, the zombie deck it does look promising. I think the only thing that's kind of tricky is just how the decayed mechanic works itself. But as you'll see later on, I do have a couple of recommendations that did come from the commander decks. And one more comment from Ron. Okay, yes, the zombie deck seems good. I'm not familiar with the cards. Okay. Yeah. No, there's no vampire commander. That would probably be the next set for Crimson Vow. So for this one, ironically, it's the werewolf set, and there was no pre-constructed werewolf commander deck. So it's definitely like a flavor fail or loss for Wizards of the Coast. But hopefully in Crimson Vow they'll make up for that. So jumping into the next recommendation, I would like to, of course, propose the use of Sunset Revelry. This is a 2 to cast sorcery. This will definitely not make it into maybe competitive decks, but I think that this is something pretty useful for Commander in a sense that if an opponent has more life than you gain 4 life. If an opponent controls more creatures than you get 2/1/1 human tokens. And if an opponent has more cards in hand than you draw a card. When you're playing Commander, you have 3 potential opponents to target, so you could possibly get all 3 benefits for casting this for 2. So it replaces itself with a new card. You get 2 blockers, you gain 4 life. I mean, it's pretty much all win-win. Now, if you're playing one-on-one, like let's say if you're playing this in standard, then you may not be able to get all benefits, or sometimes you may be able to get all, and that really there's only one player to deal with that problem. But I think that this has potential to be just a pretty good utility card for white. So just wanted to quickly mention that as a recommendation. Another uncommon, Sunset Revelry. All right. Hi, Anna. Thank you for joining. Thank you. I hope that you find the content interesting when you get to learn how to play Commander. All right. So let me jump to the next card. So the last one for my white card recommendations would actually be, I think, one of the best cards that white has for the set, and this is Vanquish the Horde. So it costs 6 colorless and 2 white. It's a sorcery, and it's a destroy all creatures. It's pretty much a board wipe. But it says that this costs 1 colorless for each creature in the battlefield. When you're playing Commander, there's probably going to be even like 3 creatures, so you're never going to have to pay the full 8 for this. And it's just a board wipe. This is probably going to be the most efficient board wipe for white. The only other card that might possibly like match up to this is a previous card called Blasphemous Act that pretty much deals 13 damage to every creature. So unless you have indestructible creatures in your opponent's boards, that this is going to take out everything. This is a must run for any white deck that just needs a board wipe that is just so cost efficient. If you have the chance to get this card, I suggest that you get it. It is going to make pretty much control decks much stronger because you don't even have to play any creatures. You can wait for your opponents to just flood up the board and wipe it out, or your own creatures count towards the discount that you get for this. So if you want your creatures to die intentionally, you can even use this as well. So I think that this is a strong recommendation for the color white from the Midnight Hunt set. So let's move to the next color. No comments? Okay, let's proceed. So I'm going to move towards green. So for those of you who are running green Commander decks, these are some cards for you to consider. I do have 5 recommendations here. We begin first with Unnatural Growth. Looking at the casting cost, this costs 5, 1 and 4 green. Most other decks or most players who are building probably think that this is near impossible to cast. Green almost doesn't care because they make so much green mana, they will cast this without even trying. And what does this do? It is an enchantment that says at the beginning of each combat, so not even yours, okay? It's just at the beginning of each combat, double the power and toughness of each creature you control until end of turn. So even during your opponent's turns, once they go into combat, your creatures double in power and toughness. This can lead to some massive beatdowns. So this here is really something to look out for. Green has always been the stomp and face smashing color, and this just takes it to a whole different level. You can combine this with other color builds because green doesn't really have a problem with like making up for mana cost, to be honest. And for 5, a guaranteed double power and toughness every combat. That means that your creatures are only at their smallest during the main phases. But the moment you go into combat, they just turn into monsters, which is wild. So something to consider. My first recommendation for green, Unnatural Growth. A couple of comments. Yes, see, green has just so many mana dorks that this will be no problem for them. If you think about it, you could probably go turn 1 and play mana dork. On turn 2, you can do your second land drop and you're already at 3. Mind you, you do have access to Mana Rocks, Elvish Spirit Guide, and other things, and might be able to actually put this down as early as turn 3. And from there, every mana dork you have doubles in power and toughness. So it can become an immediate threat immediately. Next recommendation for green is also another interesting card that has several versions already that exists but I think this one might be very applicable to different builds that I don't really run. But we have the Augur of Autumn. So this fits into Druid and Human Tribal. It is a 3 to cast 2/3. You may look at the top card of your library at any time. You may play lands from the top of your library. So this is similar to another card called the Courser of Kufrix from the Theros set. And again, this has the ability of Coven. Coven reads as follows: as long as you control 3 creatures that have different powers, you may cast creature cards from the top of your library as well. So it can serve as an extension of your hand by using the top of your library. You can basically play lands there or maybe even creatures. You won't be able to do spells, artifacts, and stuff like that, but this is pretty much a good 2/3 that doesn't really do anything else except provide you a little bit of an extension of what you could possibly be playing. So, next recommendation for green is Augur of Autumn. All right. Hey, yes, would you build with both? You know what? Redundancy is always great in Commander. The problem with having one-offs is when they're eliminated, you can't rely on them anymore. So, also the Courser of Krufix is considered an enchantment, which makes it also a possible target for removal, while this is a human druid, which is not. And the fact that it is 2/3 means that it can actually survive some early combat swings. So that's something to take into consideration. Next green recommendation is Turn to Earth. This is an uncommon, and this one's not really for everyone, but I think that what makes it really good is that it's only a single green to cast, and you can choose up to 3 target cards in graveyards, which means not your own. You can even touch other opponents' graveyards, and the owners of those cards shuffle them back into their libraries, and you just gain 2 life. And it has flashback, which means that you have a second use of this spell. Now, why is this important? Graveyard builds are so prevalent now, even down to the competitive level. Underworld Breach combos use the graveyard. You can take away a key piece and make your opponent shuffle it back into their library. You can take away something that they purposefully put into their graveyards. You will see once we get to black and blue that a lot of their abilities or builds are trying to get cards into the graveyard. So this is a great counter, and for a single green at that. Later on, flashback will give you, it'll cost you 2, but that's fine. So I think that this will be a great sideboard in standard, definitely. But in Commander, this could actually be a really key tech piece depending on the meta that you're playing. So that's why it made it into the list. I would definitely be keeping a copy of this. And if I do play a green deck, or if I know that I'm going to be playing against a high level pod that uses a lot of graveyard, this is definitely going in the deck. All right, hey, yes, I agree. There, zombies, reanimation. Nope, none of that's happening. It's a perfect foil to those plans. Next recommendation is a flip card that I think that will be seeing a lot of play. This here is the Outland Liberator. The Outland Liberator is a 2 to cast 2/2 human werewolf. You can pay 1 and sacrifice them to destroy target artifact or enchantment. So again, it's exactly like the commando that we looked at earlier, but just doesn't have flash. What this has, though, is that it could potentially flip into a 3/3 Frenzied Trap Breaker, which has the exact same ability to pay 1 and sacrifice it to destroy an artifact or enchantment, or when it attacks, it automatically can destroy an artifact or enchantment from the defending player. So, its initial form is a removal effect. It can flip over and actually become a repeatable removal effect. So it is a little better than the commando in that you might get multiple uses or at least triggers from this. But the fact that it doesn't have flash makes it a little bit slower, or that you don't have that surprise factor. This is the upgraded version, I think, of the Caustic Caterpillar, because well, it does cost a little bit more, but the activated ability is cheaper with just a colorless. So even in a pinch that if you don't really have all of your mana ready, one colorless is still pretty good to get that effect rather than being restricted by having to pay a color of mana. Now, my final recommendation for green is the legendary creature Sereth, the Viper's Fang. This actually is kind of in a lot of lists that I've been seeing, a lot of people are underwhelmed by this card, and I definitely agree in a sense that you should never run this as your commander. It is a 4 to cast 3/4 human warlock. It doesn't really fit any of the themes that green runs, but what makes it really good is that other tapped creatures you control have death touch. That means that when you attack your opponent, every creature that tapped, with the exception of Sereth, has death touch. That almost guarantees that your opponent will not want to block them. So for green that does have a lot of go wide and token strategies, if you have cards like Toski, that whenever you deal damage to an opponent, you get to draw a card, giving your creatures death touch almost gets them through every time, which is great. It makes every attacker for your deck lethal in a way. Imagine if you even use like Craterhoof, Behemoth, or some kind of trample effect. When they have death touch, the first damage is enough to kill the creature. Everything else will go through. Now, it even has a secondary ability, which means that you can get a little bit more out of it, and then it also has an activated ability. Second ability is that other untapped creatures you control have hexproof. So just having Sereth around gives your other creatures overall protection. So it can just stand there, and your other creatures that you don't want to lose in a fight or don't want to get killed have hexproof. They are essentially protected. And lastly, you can pay one colorless and tap Sereth, untap another target creature or land you control. Land. It doesn't even say basic, which means that for green that runs Gaia's Cradle, you can untap it and use it all over again. You can technically run like a infinite loop with this if you are using something like Umbral Mantle and a bunch of tokens with Gaia's Cradle. You can give all of your creatures unlimited power, and then once they attack, they become Death Touch. So there is potential with this creature. I wouldn't say that you should run this as a commander. This is an excellent recommendation for the 99, especially if you are a combat-based deck. Like this, I would auto-include in my Najila deck. So maybe you'd want to consider it. That would be the last recommendation for green, the Sereth, the Viper's Fang. All right. Yes, Finn says hi. Thank you very much. Yes, I agree. Good addition with those builds. And I think that anything that might be able to manipulate board state, especially for like if creatures are tapped or untapped, would be a really good strategy to run this. Now let's move on to red. Red surprisingly didn't really get a lot of recommendations. There's not really that many good cards. And plus, once we move to the pre-constructed decks, there's green, white, there's black, blue. There's barely any red cards in this set. And funny enough, again, it is a werewolf set that is red and green. Where are the good red cards? So I picked 5, and some of them are actually kind of underwhelming. So the very first one here is Cathartic Pyre. So it's 2 to cast, it's an instant. Why I chose this is that you can deal 3 damage to a creature, Planeswalker. Okay, or you can discard 2 cards and then draw that many cards. So what makes this good is that it has some flexibility to it, in that if you don't need it, if you don't want to discard cards, let's say that you don't have enough cards you don't have 2 cards or up to 2 cards, or you just want to keep them, you can still use this as a 2 to cast creature removal, so to speak. You can even hit a Planeswalker with it if you want, which might be actually pretty useful in some cases. So it's an interesting utility card that I think people may want to consider playing. Next, this one is a very useful card that I think a lot of people have sort of overlooked and not realized just how good it is. Because Ardent Elementalist is a 4 to cast 2/1. When it comes into the battlefield, return instant or sorcery from your graveyard to your hand. This is essentially an Archaeomancer, which used to have 2 blue. This only has a single red. There's even another version of this, which is also, I believe, 1 red, but also cost 5. I think it's the Anarchist. So This is actually a better version of those cards. It only costs 4 and only needs a single red mana and can pretty much get you back a spell that you've already used. So I think that this is definitely going to be a card that its budget, sure, it may not really be, it doesn't fit in Wizard Tribal, but the fact that it can recover a spell for you and it is cheaper or easier to cast makes it a very viable option for a lot of budget builds. My next red recommendation is the Bloodthirsty Adversary. This one here is really a personal pick for myself. It is a 2 to cast 2/2 haste vampire, which is not bad. But what makes it even better is that when it enters the battlefield, you can pay 2 in a red as many times as you want, and every time that you do, it gets a +1/+1 counter, and then exile up to that many target instant or sorcery cards with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard and copy them. You may cast the copies without paying their mana cost. So, early game 2/2 haste, nothing great. Late game, if you, let's say you cast this for 5, you get a 2/2 haste, or sorry, a 3/3 haste. Plus, you get to cast something that you've already used in previous turns for free, as long as it does fit in the requirement of mana value 3 or less. So this is a really good recommend because it does sort of have like a surprise flashback that you can utilize later in the game. And let's see, what else do we have? Okay, yeah, next red recommendation. This one, I think a lot of players also may not necessarily consider to be that good, but it does fit to my playstyle, so I would like to bring this to people's attention. This is the Obsessive Astronomer, 2 to cast 2/2, human wizard. If it's neither day or night, it becomes day as Obsessive Astronomer enters the battlefield. So it does bring in the day and night mechanic, and whenever day becomes night or night becomes day, you can discard up to 2 cards and draw that many cards. So every time day and night shift, you could get rid of cards that you don't need or are trying to filter out. As long as this is just standing around, that's a really efficient tool that, that draw discard effects, or like those looting effects, always require you to connect with combat, or you have to be able to give away a card as part of the casting cost, or it's just a sorcery or an instant. This is pretty much a loot effect on a stick. It just stands there. Okay, you have a 2/2, you can attack, you can block, it might die, but if you don't do anything with it, remember that day and night shifts when somebody plays 2 or more spells or plays no spell at all. So even on your turn, you could literally just not play anything to flip day and night and then discard 2 cards to redraw 2 cards. You have this open opportunity to dig deeper into your library that your opponents will not have. And it's just a 2/2. It's not even a threat. They're not even going to really want to kill it. So I think that this is gonna be like a little sleeper agent. It's gonna sneak into some games and surprise people. Like, I'm definitely gonna be throwing this into a deck that a lot of people do not think that it would fit in, but it is amazing. This is gonna go into a black-red reanimator. Just once day and night flips, throw away that World Gorger and pretty much go digging for an animate dead, and you can run your combo immediately. Just saying that there's so much potential. I don't see anyone talking about it. I'm gonna get one, and I want to prove people that you can run this and actually get some really, really good things happening. All right, last red recommendation. Oh, we do have a comment. Okay, let me pull up the comment. Is it just me, or does the astronomer look like Steve Buscemi? Kind of does, sure. Yeah, I think the eyes do that. Right. I agree. Good observation. Thank you. All right, last one is, I think, probably the best card for red, but not everyone's going to be running it. This is the Moonveil Regent. It is a 4 to cast 4/4 dragon, which is fine. It's a pretty much a usual attacker, and the fact that it only has 1 red means that you can splash any other colors that you want with it. When you cast the spell, you may discard your hand. If you do, draw a card for each of those spells. Let me read that again. Whenever you cast the spell, you may discard your hand. If you do, draw a card for each of that spell's colors. Okay, so pretty much if you are playing mono-colored spells, you can essentially draw 1 card. Now, if you don't have any cards in hand, let's say like you draw a single card like Hellbent, you're gonna play it and you have nothing to discard. You can opt to draw equal to that spell's color, so you can essentially be netting one card. And if Moonveil Regent dies, it deals X damage to any target where X is the number of colors among permanents you control, which means that this could also be sitting on a potential 5 damage once it dies, or even on its own, it's 1 damage. So, the reason why this makes it onto the list is a 4/4 flyer for 4, not bad at all. But the fact that you are allowed to pretty much throw away your entire hand and draw maybe 1 or 2 cards out of it makes it a pretty good hand refill if you're playing the right kind of strategy with it. So, this is my final recommendation for red, Moonveil Region. Moving on, we go to black. The very first one I'm going to be recommending here is the Morbid Opportunist. It is a 3 to cast 1/3 human rogue. Now, it doesn't sound that good because whenever one or more creatures die, draw a card, this ability triggers only once each turn. So it's not abusable, but if you read it properly, you'll see that whenever one or more creatures, other creatures die, that means that even if your opponent's creatures die, so from your turn and when you go through 3 opponents, you could potentially draw up to 4 cards with this in every cycle. And the fact that it is 1/3, only 1 black, means that it's also very easy to bring into the battlefield and is a potential draw engine for you. If you have a little bit of a slow engine, you could technically use that to your advantage and draw a card every turn. If your opponents are sort of in combat with each other, you can sit back and reap the rewards by just having the Morbid Opportunist stand there. It even fits in with Rogue Tribal. So I think that this is going to be seeing some place, a little bit of a sneaky draw engine. It's not that abusable, but you can splash it to any other color and use it for hand recovery when you need it. Okay, yes, Shattergang approves. Yes, because the timing of sacrificing and destroying things can always be controlled. And if you do that in every turn, pretty much you can recover 1 card at a time. So, yes, and thank you for joining the show, Mark. Next is going to be the Graveyard Trespasser. So, this one here is another card that when I saw, I didn't totally understand and had to take a while to read it. But I think that this here is probably the best werewolf card that they have in the set, aside from the potential werewolf commander. So the Graveyard Trespasser is 3 to cast and it's a 3/3. So you get everything that you want already for it. 3 for 3 is perfectly fine. Now it has the ability of Ward. If anyone wants to target it, they actually have to discard a card first. So it has protection. Now, when the Graveyard Trespasser enters the battlefield or attacks, so there's 2 possible triggers, exile up to 1 target card from a graveyard. So you can use this against your opponent. If a creature card was exiled this way, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. So you only get 1. Okay, you get to hit everyone for a single damage and then you gain a life. This still has a potential of really working with other decks. Like this is a perfect fit in for like the Belby deck. And just so happens that if no one plays a spell, or if they play 2 spells and you switch day and night, suddenly when it goes to Nightbound, you get the Graveyard Glutton. You have a 4/4 werewolf now. And again, it still has the ability of Ward, which gives it some form of protection. And when the Graveyard Glutton enters the battlefield or attacks, exile up to 2 cards from graveyards. For each creature that was exiled this way, each opponent loses 1 and you gain 1 life. So you could wipe out your opponent's graveyard strategies. And what's great is that it's in black, which is pretty much also going to be like a graveyard strategy, so to speak. And the fact that it just like takes away 1 life and you gain 1 life, I mean, it makes it worth the time. I think that this is a pretty good add-in. This is similar to like having there is an existing black green elf that everyone runs in any commander deck that is pretty much using black and green, that can remove instance lands and cards from other people's graveyards. This pretty much can do the same, but just with a little bit of life drain rather than producing mana. So something again to consider. Next is actually a pretty good card too, but a little expensive in terms of casting cost. This is Giza Glorious Resurrector. So Giza cost 4 and is a 4/4, which is okay, and you get a legendary human wizard. If an opponent or if a creature an opponent controls would die, exile it instead. That is great graveyard hate. Okay, so that is actually so useful against any opponent that does have a graveyard strategy, or even just tries to have a little bit of recurrence to save themselves. So you're taking away creatures from them, and now at the beginning of your upkeep, provided that you are able to survive or Giza survives one round in the table, pretty much what's going to happen here is that put all cards or creature cards exiled with Giza Glorious Resurrector onto the battlefield under your control and they gain Decayed, which means that they can no longer block and once they attack, they're sacrificed. But this means that you're able to steal creatures from your opponents. That if they do have important pieces that go into their graveyards, like some Dockside Extortionist or such, you get the enter the battlefield effect for that at the next turn. There's so much potential for this. You can steal creatures. Once you kill something, that it gets exiled, and on your next turn, if Gisa's alive, you get it into play. Now, just don't attack with it, don't block with it. They'll never get it back. So if you get creatures that even have activated abilities, you can pretty much just take them away from combat altogether and just deny your opponent these creatures. Next recommendation for black is the Meathawk Massacre. I discussed this when I was going over some of the cards that I thought would be highlights from this set, and this is definitely one of them. It is for 2 black and X. It's an enchantment, which means that this is an X spell that stays in the game. When it comes in, each creature gets -X/-X, and then it has additional effects that each creature you control that dies, your opponents lose a life. Whenever a creature an opponent dies, you gain a life. So it brings in an aristocrat life taxing effect with also being a one-time board wipe. This is really, really useful. This fits in with Toxic Deluge and other like quick black removal like Massacre, that it has more control. This I would choose this over Black Sun Zenith anytime because you technically can get back life and even drain your opponents out just a little bit with this. I won't talk about this more since I've already done it in previous episodes, and like I said, we got a long list to go through. So next black card is, let's see, here we go, the Tainted Adversary. So this is another adversary card similar to the red one earlier. It is a 2 to cast 2/3 zombie with Death Touch. That's awesome. 2 for a 2/3 that no one wants to block. You get so much out of it. Now, if you happen to pay additional mana when it enters the battlefield, it also gets +1/+1 counters and produces twice that many 2/2 black zombies with Decayed. So you get temporary attackers with it, or sacrificial fodder, depending how you build it. So this has a potential of making a late game army or even late game resources that you intentionally want them to die. So something to look out for. Now I'm going to break my rule. I said like 5 per color. I just wanted to fit in one last black card, and this is actually from the Commander pre-constructed decks. And this is Prowling Geistcatcher. It is a 4 to cast 2/4 human rogue. And the reason why I'm adding this is that it has the potential of just raising an army when you least expect it. Whenever you sacrifice another creature, exile it. And if that creature was a token, Geistcatcher gets +1/+1. Okay, so you just keep, every time you sacrifice something, it technically goes away. It doesn't go to your graveyard, which might work against certain strategies. But when Prowling Geistcatcher leaves the battlefield, which means that even if it gets exiled, even if it's returned to your hand, it still meets those requirements, and return each card exiled with it onto the battlefield under your control. you get all of the sacrifice creatures back. That has a potential of being so busted in that if you can force yourself and your opponents, let's say with like a flesh bag marauder that you sacrifice creatures, you can actually get them back later on once this prowling geist catcher leaves the battlefield for any reason. If it dies, if it's bounced, if it's exiled, that's all still leaving the battlefield. Even if you flicker this creature, you'll get that effect. So this is a hidden bomb that I think can make or break some games, because you're going to be bringing back a lot of your creatures that you've sacrificed from previous turns. So that's why I broke my rule of 5 cards to bring this in. All right, let's see. Next one. Okay, yeah. Okay, Teysa. So Teysa, black-white. Yes, definitely can make use of this because of a lot of sacrifice effects, and will, since those are also tokens, will pump this up. That is true. In terms of casting cost, Geist Catcher only has 1 black. So I think that it can fit into dual color decks easily, or even more colors. Like I would probably run this in my 4 color deck. So that's something to take into consideration. Now we're going to go to blue. I'm going to speed this up just a little bit because blue, actually, I brought 8 cards that I'll be recommending from them. So bear with me for a moment. First one is pretty simple. This is Geist Wave. It is a 2 to cast, return target non-land permanent to its owner's hand. Essentially, this is Disperse. But if you control that permanent, draw a card. So if you're using this to save yourself, you can potentially draw a card out of it. So, Dockside Extortionist. Make a bunch of treasures, send it back to your hand. And then you even get to draw. So the Geist Wave replaces itself. That is something to take into consideration. This is just a common, and if you are going to use it defensively to save your own permanents, you could net 1 card. So that's why I added it in. Next one is Otherworldly Gaze. This one I think is a really good addition, and this is sort of the graveyard strategy that I was talking about. For a single blue, look at the top 3 cards of your library. Put any number of them into your graveyard and the rest back on top in any order. When you have those crappy turns that you're drawing this land after land and you're not getting the cards that you want, this is sort of like a weird, twisted brainstorm that you can throw them away into your graveyard so that you only get the cards that you want. Or if you're a graveyard strategy, you can put your creatures directly to the graveyard. And what makes Otherworldly Gaze even better, it has flashback, which means that you get a second use of this spell later on in the game. If you're running Underworld Breach and just need a little bit of a filler for the graveyard right before you decide to start the combo, why not? So this is a 1 blue that I definitely will be running in any deck that I have that utilizes the graveyard. Now, in comparison, there is another spell similar to it that is also on the list. This is Consider. It also costs 1 blue. Look at the top card of your library. You may put that card in your graveyard, then you draw. So it's like a cantrip, and it's at instant speed. So this is definitely another one that will be perfect for like those storm quick builds that, if you just want to throw away a card and focus, you are essentially digging 1 card deep into your library and it replaces itself. So you can't go wrong with this. Definitely something to consider. Next, I have talked about this card in previous episodes, and Triska Decaphile is something that I would personally be running. Essentially, if you have an infinite mana outlet, or the Triska Decaphile is the outlet, you have no more maximum hand size. At the beginning of your upkeep, if you have exactly 13 cards in your hand, you win the game. You can pretty much use this as an alternate win condition, provided that you are able to draw up to 13 maybe at the end of an opponent's turn. And we will actually be looking at some cards later that might be able to help that, or use the activated ability of the creature itself. There's a lot of potential for this, and alternate win conditions are always something that I'm interested in, so I added this into the list. Next blue card is Malevolent Hermit. This one here, I think, is the best card that is coming out of blue. It is a rare. It is a 2 to cast 2/1 human wizard. You can pay a blue and sacrifice the Hermit to counter target non-creature spell unless its controller pays 3. So it is a counter spell on a stick, which is perfect for like late game surprise countering. And then it has a second effect that once it's in your graveyard, you can bring it in for its disturbed cost. What does that do? It brings it in as a 2/2 flying, and non creature spells you control can't be countered. So it becomes a protection for your combo. It's perfect for late game. That if you are ready to use, let's say, your Thassa's Oracle Demonic Consultation, it can't be countered. They're going to have to deal with the Geist before they can get to your actual spells. So it's great protection. This is definitely going into like my personal CEDH deck, because anytime that you need like a silence effect or something that would prevent your opponents from countering what you're trying to do, you should be running it. And the fact that this becomes a 2/2 flyer even makes it nearly unblockable, which will fit with a lot of other strategies. So probably my favorite blue card from the set. Next is Memory Deluge. It is for the cast. It is an instant. Okay, so mind you that there are other spells that do similar effects but have always either been sorcery or cost more. Look at the top X cards of your library, where X was the amount of mana spent to cast the spell. Put 2 of them into your hand and the rest in the bottom of your library in a random order. So you pay 4 to pretty much look at the top 4 and keep 2 cards. That's a pretty good dig. Now, if you manage to pay the flashback cost later in the game, you can also look at the top 7 of your library, and then you get to actually keep 2 of those. So this does become, there is a previous spell, I believe this is Dig Through Memory, or yep, so similar to that. So this is just an alternate version of it, but uses flashback and not delve. And I would definitely run this in any mono blue deck. One of the other things that people want to consider, this is Lear, Disciple of the Drowned. He is a 5 to cast 3/4 legendary creature, a human wizard, and each instant and sorcery in your graveyard has flashback, which is its actual cost. So you get repeatable spells, but what makes him perfect or really good is that he has a static ability that spells can't be countered. So bring him down the turn that you're going to be running your combo, and no one can counter. Maybe bounce, maybe destroy stuff. They might be able to interact or redirect spells, but the fact that you can take away countering makes it really, really good. Now, there is a little bit of a downside in that even your opponents now can't be countered. So you just want to be careful with this. But this is like a modified version of Teferi, the Mage of Zalfir, that he's no longer flash and also doesn't give other creatures flash, but it pretty much brings in the same effect. I would definitely run Teferi over this guy any day. But the fact that they're both 5 to cast, they're both 3/4s, and that this one has flashback tacked onto it makes it like an alternate version of Kess, which is a Grixis red, black, blue creature, but this is only mono blue. So at the same time, each instant or sorcery in your graveyard has a flashback, and it doesn't say anything about when it's your turn or your opponent's turn. So as long as they're instant speeds, you have flashback during your opponent's turn if you want to use those spells again. Last recommendation for blue. So yep, we're about bordering into the 1 hour mark. So yeah, I'm going to try to speed this up because I did pick a lot of gold cards for the set for people to consider. This one comes from the Commander deck, and this is Shadowkin. It is a 4 to cast 2/2. It has Flash, which makes it instant speed. And at the beginning of your upkeep, each player mills 3 cards. You may exile a creature from among the cards that were milled this way, and if you do, Shadowkin becomes a copy of that card, except it has this ability. So, the way that this is worded is that you mill 3 cards, and you may exile a creature card. So, if something massive, let's say even those with like a reshuffle effect get milled, you can exile it. I mean, it's part of the ability resolving. So if you get something like you might be able to copy an Eldrazi with this, really, or that you pretty much can deny your opponent creatures, And you don't have to do this every turn because it says you may exile a creature. Once you get a copy of something that you want, you don't have to change it anymore. So this is actually a sneaky creature that I think should make it into a lot of like clone builds or sort of strategies that are reliant on other players. Shadowkin is my last blue recommendation and something to look out for. I mean, I don't think that a lot of people are going to be running this because of the for the cast restriction, but the fact that it is flash and can pretty much be played during the end of your opponent's turn so that you are guaranteed mill effect, you can disrupt a lot of games with this. Now let's move on to multicolor. Multicolor, I did choose a lot of recommendations here, so I'm going to try to speed through this, and I think some of them are pretty self-explanatory, but let's begin. First one is Diagraph Rebirth. This is a reanimation spell that says that it costs one less for each creature that died this turn. So, best scenario, you could potentially just pay a black and a green to bring back any creature from your graveyard to the battlefield, as long as you timed it with a bunch of creatures dying, like after attacking. And then flashback is also reduced by this effect. So you could use this twice to reanimate your best creature into the game. So if you're playing black and green, I highly suggest picking up this card. Next is Croaking Counterpart. This one a lot of people are making fun of because it doesn't seem like it has that great of an ability. I really beg to differ. This is 3 to cast. It is a sorcery. It says that create a token that's a copy of target non-frog creature, except it's a 1/1 green frog. You can target anything, your opponent's creatures, and pretty much you will get a copy of it. So if you see a creature with an amazing come into play effect, or let's say that you're playing on a budget, you don't have Gilded Drake, you can create a 1/1 green Gilded Drake and essentially get its ability. And then this has flashback, which means that you have a second use of it. If you are built around ETB effects, this is a great card to have in your back pocket. It's a great utility to copy anything that has an amazing enter the battlefield effect. So that is Croaking Counterpart. Next is Siphon Insight. For a blue and a black, look at the top 2 cards of target opponent library. So it's also at instant speed, which means that you can surprise your opponents by exiling one of those cards face down and putting the other in the bottom of their library. You may look and play that card as long as it remains exiled, and you can spend mana to cast it pretty much as if it were any color. You can steal the top card of your opponent's library. Time this with a good shooter, and you could be breaking their game. And then the fact that this has flashback means that you get a second use of it. This one, I think, is an auto include in like CEDH, that the moment somebody uses like their Imperial Seal, Worldly Tutor, Mystical Tutor, Enlightened Tutor, once they put something on the top of their library, take it. Just take it away from them. You can even make it worse because you get to look at 2 cards or even choose to put it underneath their library, making their tutor worthless. So something again that I think is an auto run. Next is pretty much I think one of the best gold or multicolor legendaries from this set. This is Vadric Astral Archmage. He's a 3 to cast 1/2. If it's neither day or night, it becomes day. So it brings in the concept of day and night again. Instants and sorceries, you cast cost X less, where X is Vadric's power. So at the best, you're getting at least a discount of 1, which is perfect for red and blue, which is the spell slinging combination. Now, whenever day or night flips around, you put a +1/+1 counter on Vadric, which means that the discount gets bigger and bigger the more times spells are played or no spells are played at all. So this guy has the potential of being an amazing discount, similar to Mizzix, which is which was I believe the 2014 commander, like the blue-red legendary that had the experience counters that you'd have to play a progression of spells that cost more every time. We covered this in the episode that I did for Prismari and Izzet. So this is going to be, I think, an alternate version to that, and you can technically run human wizard tribal here, which is a great thing for red and blue. The options for wizards in red and blue have always been some of the best of their kind, so to speak. Well, white has great humans, but wizards is mostly in red and blue. So this one is an auto buy for me. I will be looking for this in foil. Next is Catilda, Dawnheart Prime. It is a 2 to cast 1/1, has protection from werewolves, which isn't that necessary, but humans, creatures you control have tap, add 1 mana of any color. It pretty much makes human tribal into making all of your humans mana producers, which is amazing. So if you do have like 1/1 human tokens that aren't doing anything, you could turn them into mana rocks, which is great. And then the second ability here of being able to put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control is just a little nice to have, but isn't that important. It actually costs way too much. But a 2 to cast that makes all of your humans into mana dorks, great addition. Not a commander, definitely more of a 99. So um, it counts itself as a human, so it is technically a 2 to cast 1/1 that can later on make mana of any color. So that's also something to take into consideration. Now, leaving that, we go into the best card for multicolor for me, which is Rite of Harmony. It costs a green and a white. It is an instant. Whenever a creature or enchantment enters the battlefield under your control, draw a card. If you time this well with the right build that makes a bunch of tokens, you could be drawing so much. And then later in the game, you can even flash this back in and get that effect again. For a green and a white, this is abusable in so many ways. White has the way of producing so many tokens. Green has a way of producing so many tokens and mana. Pair it off with effects like pretty much the commander or legendary that we just looked at here for Catilda, and let's say all of your humans now can tap for mana. You can just keep casting and drawing, so to speak. So this here is an amazing draw engine that everyone should be running if you are in green and white. Next, I know I'm kind of rushing through it, but I did cover Old Stick Fingers in my last episode for my top Golgari. This guy, if you play the right kind of deck, can guarantee you specific creatures in your graveyard every time. Let's say that you run your entire library with just a single creature that you want to show up every time. Let's say you're running Gristlebrand. If it wasn't banned, okay, you can pay a green, a black, and 1, and pretty much Old Stick Fingers will guarantee that that creature goes to your graveyard every time. It is the perfect graveyard strategy commander. So I did talk about this already in a previous episode, so I'm going to step back and leave that as is. Old Stick Fingers gets the recommend. Next is Florian. Florian is the Voldaren Scion, a 3 to cast 3/3 first strike, Vampire Noble. So you get what you pay for, 3 for 3, and then you even get first strike, which is great. Now, next to that is at the beginning of your post-combat main phase, which is pretty much main number 2. Look at the top X cards of your library, where X is the total amount of life your opponents lost this turn. Exile one of those cards and put the rest in the bottom of your library in a random order, and then you may play that exiled card. Okay, so this is essentially digging through your library for the top. It's almost like a shooter, so to speak. If you can just get enough damage going every turn, if you use like red taxing effects, so to speak, punish your opponents, you get to look at that many cards after combat. This here, I mean, there was a recent Game Nights episode where Josh Lee Kwai was running this, and looking through like the top 9 of your library is really crazy. It is broken if you are running it the right way. I wouldn't maybe make Florian your commander, but just having him in the deck when he shows up can actually make him a really good addition to your deck. But if you really want to be consistently using this ability, definitely run him as your commander. Next, no explanation needed. Teferi. Every version of this guy is amazing. So this is a 4 to cast 4 loyalty planeswalker. that you can choose up to one target artifact, up to one target creature, and up to one target land. Untap those permanents if you control them, and then tap those chosen permanents if you don't control them, and then you gain 2 life. What an amazing control piece. It comes in, you can pretty much discount it for 1 with a land. You can even untap an artifact that you used to cast it, or even just tap down a creature that could attack and kill him. So he even has his own protection, so to speak. Then you can use the number -2. Look at the top 3 cards in your library, put one in your hand, and then the rest in the bottom of your library. So it has a dig effect. And then finally, if you get the 7, which is very easy to do with this because it does protect itself, you get an emblem that says untap all permanents you control during each opponent's untap step, and then you draw a card during each of your opponent's draw steps. So you start playing along with your opponent's turns as well, which is pretty crazy. Every Teferi that they've produced has been crazy, except maybe for the Planeswalker deck, but that's even still pretty strong, I think. But it's like cost like 7. This one is gonna be another game warping card. Standard is gonna hate this. In Commander, you may not get Teferi all the time, but when you do, I think that this has really good control effects. That it may not be able to control all 3 of your opponents, but I think that just even using it for its -2 or such can bring a lot of use to the game. Next is Lisa, the Forgotten Archangel. I ran the Commander Legends version of Lisa, so it's nice to see that they've made another one. Still 5 to cast, not 5/5 anymore. Now it is 4/5 flying lifelink, which is pretty good, just about the same. But whenever another non-token creature you control dies, return that card to your hand at the beginning of the next end step. So you get creatures back every time that they die. I mean, it's slower in that you have to cast it again, but it does bring at least a lot of repetitive play for you. Just like the commando that we discussed at the very start of the show, having it returned to your hand and using it again makes it pretty much at least more efficient than just being a single use card. And then it has one more ability that says if a creature an opponent control would die, exile it instead. So it has graveyard hate for your opponents. So this again breaks parity in a great way that you get to repeat your creatures because it goes back to your hand, and then your opponents get punished by losing their creatures. And you have a 4/5 flying lifelink, which is pretty good. Next is Fateful Mending. This is pretty much just Fateless looting, but in blue and white, and at instant speed. You gain 2 life, draw 2 cards, and discard 2 cards. The ability just to dig into your library for that many cards is actually pretty good, and giving it flashback and a secondary use makes it even better. This is much better than Fateless looting, except that it is a little mana restrictive. If you are running blue and white, I highly suggest throwing this in because just going in for 2 more cards and even potentially throwing some unwanted cards into your graveyard, or if you are running again a strategy that cares about the graveyard, this is still a 2 to cast, essentially draw 2 cards. Can't go wrong with that. So this one I'm also definitely getting a copy of. So we're pretty much running down the final half here. So we have about 3 more cards and then maybe the artifacts and lands, which are pretty quick. So next one is Suspicious Stowaway. So this one is actually Simic. That's why I wanted to include it in blue or green, but it is a multicolored card. Suspicious Stowaway is a 2 to cast 1/1 human rogue werewolf. That's a mouthful. And can't be blocked, which is great. It pretty much has evasion, and once it deals damage to a player, you get to draw a card and discard a card, which means that it has a looting effect. And then has Daybound. If day and night switch around for any reason, you will get a Seafaring Werewolf, which is pretty much an interesting, like, blue to green creature. But okay, it still can't be blocked, but this time, if it deals combat damage to a player, you just draw a card. No more discarding effect. So its green side is actually much better than the blue, and it's also a 2/1. So this is actually a sneaky creature that you can throw into a lot of those decks that need you to hit face. If you are running effects like the Toski or pretty much any other creature that want you to connect to an opponent. This is perfect for one of the original blue-green commanders, Edric Spymaster, because it can't be blocked, so you can hit an opponent and you're guaranteed a draw with it every time. So something to look out for. I think that this is going to see a lot of play, but it is also a little weak in terms of a one toughness. But again, can't be blocked, so not like it's ever going to have a problem to face when hitting opponent's face. Now, the last two, these are cards that I found from the precon decks, and I think that these are actually even better than the face commanders of the pre-constructed decks. Very first one is Eloise, Nephalia Sleuth, which is a 5 to cast 4/4 human rogue, so it's really expensive. But whenever another creature dies, a you control dies, investigate, you get a clue token. And then whenever you sacrifice a token, you get the surveil, which means that you even get to look at the top of your library and throw that card away if you don't like it. So if you are running a sacrificial build or have a lot of creatures dying, like with the decayed effect, this can dig through so much of your library and even produce so many clue tokens for you. It doesn't have any limitation of once per turn or anything like that. And I think that that's why it costs 5. If they made it cost less and maybe made it like a 3 to cast 2/2, this would be an amazing card. So they did try to control it by increasing its casting cost, but I would rather play this than the face card of the pre-constructed deck, to be honest. And also, going to green-white, another 5 to cast that I would rather run in a pre-constructed deck for green-white instead of the face commander of the box. This is Kyler, Sigardan Emissary. He's a 5 to cast 2/2 human cleric. But what makes Kyler amazing is that whenever another human enters the battlefield under your control, he gets +1/+1. Any human, token or creature card, doesn't matter. As long as it's human, he gets bigger. And other humans you control get +1/+1 for each counter on Kyler. So this guy is a living anthem that gets bigger and bigger as you play humans. So you could essentially make some of the largest human creature tokens with him and just smash face, which is something that actually human decks can do but take a while to get to. So I mean, he's 5 to cast, and when he comes in, he doesn't have any counters, so that's what makes him a little weak. But in the right build, this guy could actually be such a great late game bomb that would just immediately just buff up all of your humans for one massive alpha strike. So I think that this deserves at least a review, or someone should try building a Kyler. Or if not, have him in your 99 as a surprise effect. So that's it for the multicolor cards. Now we're just going to be doing 2 artifacts and just one quick touch on the land cycle. So for artifacts, I think that the Celestus, which I did discuss in my previous video, should be included. It is a 3 to cast legendary artifact, which is essentially a mana rock, and that it brings the day and night cycle into the game. And whenever day becomes night or night becomes day, you gain a life and you may draw a card, and if you do, discard a card. So similar to some of the other effects that I mentioned here, like for the red creature that we are looking at for the Astronomer, this is a little bit less, that it's only 1 card, but every time this flips or day becomes night and night becomes day, you could gain a life and just net a card. So even if it's not your turn and your opponents are on a counter battle, so to speak, you could reap the rewards. Definitely something worth adding into your deck, because most 3-color mana rocks, or 3 to cast mana rocks, aren't that efficient. I mean, you just get to make 1 mana of any color. So this one does that same effect, but has the potential of just giving you 1 life at a time and drawing some cards. So if you're not that worried about the speed of your deck, like I only run 2 mana rocks or less, then maybe don't run this. But I would definitely run this in any deck that does need a little bit of card draw and also maybe some filtering because it goes into the graveyard. So my first of the two artifact recommendations from the deck from the set is the Celestus. Next one I also discussed in my previous video. This is the Moon Silver Key. It costs 2 and you pay 1 and sacrifice it. Okay? Search your library for an artifact that has a mana ability, which means it can look for the Celestus, or a basic land, reveal it and put it in your hand. I'm seeing something here that I don't know if any other players are looking at, but this is essentially an artifact shooter. If you are looking for a mana rock, you can go get Alliance Eye Diamond. You can go get a Mana Crypt, Mana Vault, Grim Monolith, Basal Monolith, anything that you're using pretty much for an artifact-based combo. As long as it produces mana, you can go look for it. If you're desperate enough, you can technically just get any rock that you want. Let's say that you open a turn with this. By the next turn, you can sacrifice it and go get your best 0 to cast mana rock and just bring it into the game. So it does have the ability, I think, that can see competitive play if you are running the right deck. Now, okay, the Urza Saga land is probably better because you just get it for free without having to do like tap and sacrifice, but you might have to also wait 1 or 2 turns. So this is just another version of that. And if you're looking for redundancy or looking for a way to make sure that you get the mana rock that you need and you're not running blue or white, please consider the Moon Silver Key. And so now finally we go to my last recommendation, which is for lands. And there's only really one thing to discuss. These are called, or pretty much nicknamed, these slow lands. You have 5 of them that come in green-white, blue-white, black-blue, red-green, and black-red. These are pretty much the ally colors, or like the Khans of Tarkir colors, the Onslaught fetch lands, that these are built on coming into play tapped unless you control 2 or more other lands. So you want to play them turn 3 onwards, hence the name Slow Land. That there is actually a different version of this that are the ones, the fast lands, that they only come in untapped if you have 2 or less lands. Sea Chrome Coast, some of those other ones that came out in the Mirrodin cycle, or Mirrodin Besieged, I believe. So this here is perfect for like turn 3 onwards, just getting a dual colored land with no drawback whatsoever. You can't fetch for them, they don't really have land types, but I think that if you are running on a budget, if you cannot afford dual lands, this is definitely something to consider. They are great mana fixers to be added into your options for building. So I may not have a spot for these anymore. I would maybe rather go with the Battle Bond lands and also the ones that came out in Commander Legends. But again, if you are running a budget or if you're looking for lands from the set, these are the only ones I would go with. The non-colored lands that came out for the Midnight Hunt set, I don't really see any use in the Commander field. So I would avoid those. So that brings us to the end of the list. For those of you who stuck around, I do see a couple of people still watching. Thank you very much. To those of you who also shared your feedback and comments, I really appreciate it. Thank you, Ron. Thank you, Aaron, Nico, Mark, Anna. Thank you for the comments. It's really nice to see some feedback from people. And I hope that, the list that I had today, it is pretty long. We went over like 40 cards, really. I think bordering 50, if I'm not mistaken. But I hope that these recommendations from the set help you build or at least find the pieces that you want from the set rather than just like blindly buying packs. I am really a strong believer in buying singles. Thank you, Professor from the Tolarian Community College, for teaching me that. So again, they're just wrapping up our Innistrad Midnight Hunt set. There's so much that just came out. I know that the paper or printed version of this is a little delayed, so I hope that this information at least helps your purchasing decisions moving forward. There's nothing wrong with drafting and cracking packs, but in the world of Commander, I think that it is really best to consider buying singles. The pre-constructed decks, just like what Ron appreciates, is that it is like a contained experience that you can appreciate. May not be for everyone, But if you're also just trying to incorporate this set into your existing commander decks, I hope that this list has been helpful. And with that, I wrap up the episode. This is probably the longest episode that I've done. Well, as opposed maybe with contending with the episode where I had Jake and Sir Freddy here for the Magic 2022 announcements. But we're not gonna linger on length. Instead, I'm gonna thank everyone for joining. I appreciate everyone so much for joining the show, sharing your feedback, like, share, subscribe, do everything that you need to do. I appreciate it. Till the next episode, keep safe and keep gaming.